open my eyes to see what was going on. And this wonderful man, this large, tall, wonderful man was telling his story with so much passion and so much authenticity and powerful connectedness that it required stomping for emphasis. You might experience a little bit of that. Terry McBride, please come on up.
Thank you. I brought my Science of Mind book that I'm going to quote out of, but I decided I better type out the quotes rather than pick this up and read it, because this morning when I picked it up my desk, there was still part of it left on the desk. What a delight to be with you again. And Karen Lewis contacted me to speak after we settled on the date and everything. I got up from my desk and did my happy dance. And no, I'm not going to do my happy dance this morning for you. I only do it for my oldest daughter, Chris, who's 50. And she reminds me that when she was a little girl, when I would try and get her engaged or, get her to laugh and giggle, I'd go in and say, "It's time for the happy dance." And I only do it with her. Except a couple months ago when we were in Safeway and she said, "Dad, I need the happy dance." We didn't get asked to leave, but I was a tad bit embarrassed. And I thank Karen. More than that, I thank the people at New Vision who make the decision about who's going to come and be a guest speaker. I'm honored. This morning, the topic is Christmas and Science of Mind. And I want to share with you this morning my perceptions of Christmas and Science of Mind, how they tie together. I know that it's risky to come into a center like this and start talking about this is what Jesus was talking about, this is what Jesus meant, because there are people in this room, and the reason they're here is they wanted to get away from where they were taught, Jesus said this and Jesus said that. So I know it's risky. But I thought it was important enough to take that risk. And since we're family, I expect you to cut me a little slack if I say something wrong. I would never presume to tell you this is the way it is. I would just share my story. I've spoken here before. I've been speaking here since you were founded when it was on 7th Avenue, 30-some years. And most of you have heard my story. I was real sick when I was in my 20s, had an E. coli infection in my spine for 11 years. And sometimes people say, "Are you going to tell your story again?" I don't tell my story to brag about it. I tell my story because that's where I did my graduate school. 11 years in and out of the hospital with people saying you can't get well, you need to accept, face reality. It was where I began to study and explore these principles. And some of you may not realize, because the only time you see me is when I'm in front of a church or spiritual organization talking about spiritual truths, but I wasn't always as involved in my own spirituality as I am today. I didn't wake up when I was in my 20s and the first thought was about God and how that wasn't where I was. I was trying to go to college. I was trying to be a father, trying to figure out how do I get well. But there was one story in the hospital of my 27 spinal operations. When they decided that it was about the 15th surgery or so, or maybe it was the 16th spinal operation, I don't know, and they came in and they said, look, the problem is we can't get this antibiotic into the bone, into the spine. There's not a good blood supply. So what we're going to do is take all the tissue out of your back and your buttocks, and we're going to open all that up so we can see your spine. And then we're going to put you in a body cast for 6 months while that heals, and while it's healing, we'll come in and take the bandages off and put antibiotics right on your spine. It wasn't something that I went, oh, good, let's do this. But after 14, 15 surgeries, it's like, if that's what we got to do to... They did the surgery. They wouldn't let me see the wound. Finally, when I got mirrors and propped myself up and looked in when they were changing the bandages one day, I saw these 2 red pieces of meat, just like you'd buy in a grocery store, and a yellow bumpy thing. And I said, what is that? And the doctor, who I knew him, he'd been doing surgeries on me for 2-3 years. He was a resident. I said, what is that yellow bumpy thing? And he said, Terry, that's your spine. Lay down. I'd had terrible things done to my body. But that one took me over the edge. I remember yelling and screaming, saying, what have you done? What have you done? And he said, we told you. Yeah, but I didn't know it. And I said, what are the chances of me getting well? How can I ever recover from this? What are the chances of me? And he said, Terry, you're not going to recover from this. What you have is chronic osteomyelitis. It will be there for the rest of your life. You'll have to have ongoing surgeries. You will always have those drains where this pus is coming out of your body. You're always going to go to the bathroom in that plastic bag. And I argued and I fought and I said, there's got to be a chance. And finally he looked at me and he said, the chances of you getting perfectly well are 1,000,000 to 1. You would need a miracle. And as soon as he said that, he backed up. Well, after he left, I was already reading self-help books. I read Psycho-Cybernetics about the power of the unconscious mind, or the power of the self-image. I read Joseph Murphy's The Power of the Unconscious Mind. I read, The Magic of Believing. I read these books. But when he said, you will need a miracle, to me, miracles involved God. It wasn't an overnight realization. I didn't spend 6 months in that body cast. I only spent about 3. But that was alone every night with me in this body cast from my knees up into my upper chest, like this in bed, thinking about, I need a miracle. What does that involve? Because there were people in the hospital who were a lot more spiritual than me, had died. So when I got out of the hospital, I was in that body cast almost 3 months. I got out, I was home a couple days, and I went to see my Uncle Larry. He was my father image. He was the guy I could trust to tell me the truth as he saw it. So I drove up there on Saturday morning. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning, and we're out in the backyard. We're drinking beer and tomato juice. He said it was a health drink. It would help me regain my strength. I'm not sure I believed him, and after 2 or 3, I'm not sure I even cared. But as we were sitting there, after we chatted for a while, I looked at him and I said, I need to ask you a tough question. He said, okay. And I said, do you think I need to start reading the Bible? I mean, I'd grown up in church. I was baptized in the Disciples of Christ Church, one of those full immersion things. And they held me underwater longer than they did the other kids. I just know they did. Anyway, so I'd grown up in Sunday school. I knew the scriptures. I knew the stories of Jesus. But spirituality wasn't something I did every day. So I'm asking Uncle, do you think I need to read the Bible? And he looks at me and he says, don't ask me. He says, ask Creeth. That was his younger brother. He says, ask Creeth. He's a deacon in that church in Billings. You know how deacons are. They know everything. And I said, no, I'm asking you. And he says, well, I used to read the Bible, but he says, I don't read it much anymore. And he says, you know what? I don't think God cares. This stuff about God being an ornery old cuss and always mad at us for what we did or didn't do, he says, I don't think it's true. I think God just loves us. And he says, I think when you die, God's just waiting there and says, hey, good to see you again, Larry. How was your time down there? Come on back. Let's talk. And he said, so I don't think you'll be in trouble when you die if you haven't read the Bible. And I said, I'm not worried about dying, Larry. I called him Gramps. I'm not worried about dying, Gramps. I'm worried about getting well. And he said, why? What do you mean? And I said, when I was in the hospital last time, they told me I would need a miracle to get well. And he looked at me, he said, a miracle? Well, then if I was you, I'd read the Bible. And we laughed. I said, but why? And he said, it's simple, son. If you're laying in your hospital bed one night and God does show up, you know how authors are. First question he's going to ask you is, have you read my book? Now, I don't know about you, but that made sense to me. I didn't know how this stuff worked. I didn't know how God showed up, and I could just see whatever that would be, that spiritual, I started reading the Bible. Pretty quick, I let the Old Testament go. I didn't know about the metaphysical interpretation of the Old Testament, so I just let that go. God in the Old Testament seemed too angry for me. But I like the God in the New Testament. The God in the New Testament was about love. And it seemed to me, I'm not saying this the way it is, it seemed to me the New Testament was about moving forward. It wasn't about healing the past or fixing your karma or whatever. It was about moving forward. So I like that. But even at that, as I continued to read this, and I'm not talking weeks, I'm not talking months, I'm talking years. I had that infection for 11 years. I'm talking years. I'm reading, and pretty quick I gravitated to what's called the red letter edition. It's the New Testament, and what Jesus says is in red letters. And so all I started reading over and over and over again was, what was Jesus saying about this? I didn't know about Ernest Holmes. I didn't know about Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. I didn't know about Science of Mind or Unity or the only one I knew about was Christian Science, and the only thing I heard about them was they're silly because they won't let you go to a doctor. This was 50 years ago. The only book that said all things were possible was this one in my hand called the New Testament. And I read it over and over. And what I was trying to figure out was, what was Jesus getting at when he said all things are possible if only you believe? What did that mean? What did he mean by whatever you ask for in prayer, that state of consciousness that he was calling prayer? What did he mean when he said, whatever you ask for in that state of consciousness called prayer, it shall happen if you believe it? Whatever you ask for in prayer, believing you shall have it, you shall have it. What did he mean by the faith of a mustard seed can move a mountain? The books I was reading, the self-help books, said that we could create faith. They said we could change belief, but how did that tie into what Jesus was talking about? I couldn't get my mind around it. It seemed that I was so stuck in my past beliefs about religion, the dogma and traditions that I'd grown up with, saying this is what it is, this is how you do it, and all this stuff. I couldn't get past that to get an understanding about what did this great teacher bring. I couldn't get past the spiritual people I knew who were saying things like, don't you think if God wanted you to be well, he would have healed you by now? I'm 15, 16 surgeries into this. If I could get past the idea of sacred contracts, if I get past the idea of karma, if I could get past all this idea of I have to pay for what I've done. But who could I talk about this with? Where could I go? Who could I say, I need to understand how to do miracles? I couldn't talk to the psychiatrist they sent me to. Because when he read letters and said, you're never going to get well, you're going to have significant permanent disability, you're going to have that colostomy the rest of your life. When I said, I don't want to believe like you, I'm reading these books, I'm going to be well. And he said, that's your ego talking, Terry. Who would I talk to somebody about? How do you control the power of God? I mean, I wasn't as sick as I was in the beginning. I was gaining on it. I didn't, by that time, I didn't have the colostomy anymore. I'd healed the colon. I was gaining. But I was still having surgeries after surgeries. And then one day, a friend of mine, Ole Wise, invited me to go with him to the Seattle Church of Religious Science. Ole was the president of the board. We lived in the same apartment complex while we were each getting a divorce. And we didn't talk about spirituality, but we talked about other things. And one day he said, would you like to go to my church with me? That Sunday, the talk was about the similarities within the Bible and some of the Buddhists' sacred texts. And I thought, oh my gosh, here we are exploring other great spiritual teachings without talking about there's only one way or that stuff. It wasn't exclusive, it was inclusive. The music touched my heart. The people smiled and they laughed and they hugged one another. And there was a sense of joy and participation. And they talked about these great spiritual principles. But more than just talk about the principles, they addressed how we might be able to use these great spiritual principles right now, right here in our everyday life. And I was empowered. And when I walked out, I picked up a brochure. And it said, Science of Mind is the correlation of... Science of Mind is a correlation of the laws of science, the opinions of philosophy, and the revelations of religion applied to human needs and the aspirations of humanity. And I thought, this is where I can go. This is a family. This is a group of people that I can come and associate with and explore how might I use these principles to get well. And I did find the power and the authority I was looking for. I found the ability to stand boldly in the magnificence of who I already was and declare, I will not be denied. And it was that kind of energy. It was the power of God. But I found so much more than just how to apply spiritual power to create more of what you want in your life. On page 100 of Living the Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes says this: outside of the Christian scriptures, very little is mentioned in the other great spiritual traditions about the healing of the sick or the control of conditions through the use of divine power. But there was so much more. Ernest pointed out that what Jesus brought to the human race was how to experience life with peace and joy. It wasn't just that he brought, as ye believe, so shall it be done unto you. Ernest talks about, he said, when Jesus was asked why he was here on 2 separate occasions, the first time he answered, I have come that my joy might be in you and your joy might be full. And Ernest Holmes says the reason that joy is there is that through his teachings we understand who we are. And it is that understanding of self that allows joy to permeate every aspect of your life. The second time Jesus was asked, why have you come? What is your purpose of being here? He said, I have come that you might have life and have it abundantly. And Ernest Holmes says the reason what he was talking about there is that there are spiritual principles you can use to make your dreams come true. You're not in bondage to the flesh. You are here free and able to create anything you want. Jesus came to give us life and give it abundantly, Ernest Holmes says that. Joy in who you are, and joy in the knowledge that you have dominion over this physical plane. Ernest goes on. On page 18 and 20. He's talking about, he says this, until the time of Jesus, it had been believed that God might help us, that there were concessions God would make if we pleased him, or if we performed certain rites and ceremonials. And you know what that's like. Some of us grew up with that. Geez, God will help you as long as you do, and they gave you this list. And what Ernest says is, Jesus changed all of that. On page 20, he says, and what he gave us was so simple that it often eludes us. For he says, Jesus brought the idea that we are surrounded by creative mind, which reacts to our thinking. He said that the sum total of all of our thinking decides what is going to happen to us. And we can change our thinking and cause the very power that limited us to bring us again to freedom. Ernest says, what more could we ask? What more could we be given than this great gift of freedom? I wrote an article for your newsletter or your e-blast about this Sunday. It says this: Christmas holds a special meaning for religious scientists because, as Ernest states on page 64 and 65 of Living the Science of Mind, it is the purpose of the New Thought movement to prove the teachings of Jesus. He's not just talking about science of mind. He's talking about unity, divine science, all of this. The purpose of New Thought is to prove the teachings of Jesus. For he goes on and states that within these teachings, it is held that the creative power of God is individualized in every person. And that the spiritual tools of faith, belief, and conviction are dynamic, creative instruments to be used in everyday life. This God power, as Ernest calls us, allows us to stand in our divine reality and demonstrate or use this infinite power in whatever manner you see fit. Remember, Science of Mind is about your needs and your aspirations. Certainly, Christmas and the holiday season can be filled with family, joy, and giving. It can also be a time of introspection and renewal, where each of us take time to reconnect with the essence of who we are and the power and authority that we already have. Christmas in our culture can be about celebrating the birth of Jesus. And as a religious scientist, it can also be about celebrating the teachings that allow each of us to own a truth that sets us free. This movement gave me the teachings, gave me the truth and the meaning behind what I was seeking all those years when I was sick. It allowed me to stand boldly, still engulfed with disease, and say, I'm not my stuff. I am holy. As Jesus said, know ye not your sons and daughters of the Most High. Ernest says this is what he was talking about, is how Ernest language is that you are the personification of that which is God expressing as woman. God expressing as man. Know ye not your sons and daughters of the Most High, and that all things are possible if only you believe. On page 54, Ernest sort of summarizes the whole thing when he says, there is no question that Jesus introduced a whole new outlook on life, a whole new philosophy of living. For he alone had the faith and the courage to announce without qualification and without limitation that the same power that created everything and holds everything in place is also the very power that is at the center of your own being. And you can use this power. That's what Ernest Holmes says Jesus brought to the human race. I don't know what challenges you might face. I remember what it's like to be really sick and really alone and really afraid. And what I want to tell you this morning is that you are no longer alone. On the website of New Vision Center for Spiritual Living, if you go to their homepage, it says, welcome home, and then there's 2 or 3 paragraphs. The last paragraph says this: if you are in search of a spiritual community where you are respected and accepted for who you are, and you want the inspiration and support to grow to your highest potential, please accept our invitation to visit soon. There is so much going on here at New Vision. In January, you've got 3 of the finest trainings that are out there. You know, on January 11th, you've got the 10-week class, Treatment and Meditation. It's not, treatment is how we pray. It isn't sort of, here's the, and hold your hands and do this. And it's like, this is what prayer is about. You read the books, you do the homework, you talk about it with your friends in the class, and over the 10 weeks, you figure out how you use prayer, how you can use prayer and meditation to reconnect with that essence that you are. On Tuesday, January 19th, there's a class starting, a 10-week class called Exploring Roots. This is where you get to sit with other people and read, what did some of these other great thinkers think? How did they put it together? You talk about it, you explore it, and what happens in this class is it isn't just, oh, this is how you make it up because they said so. What you begin to explore is, how are you going to make it up? How are you going to bring these teachings together? And then on January 6th, you're doing Prosperity Plus 2, Mary Morrissey's class that I just can't say enough about. It is a magnificent class, and you will be transformed if you go into it. There's so much here. And in February, it looks like you're going to have a new minister. And the volunteer opportunities. You ought to get here early in the morning and watch the volunteers as they start to show up. Watch the band as they start to communicate with people, and as people come in to do something, they'll wave and smile. You see people giving hugs, you understand that you really are part of the family. Get involved. Get involved. Because if you get involved, you will find what you are seeking. As I look back on my journey with the teaching of Jesus and how that integrated and how I learned how I might apply some of those teachings through the interpretation of Ernest Holmes in this great philosophy we call Science of Mind. As I look back and watch this dance that was going on between these incredible ideas and concepts, if I was to summarize how I hold what I learned, I think I could do it in 3 phrases. I am whole. I am powerful. And I am free. I invite you with me. Close your eyes. Be open to the essence of what this center stands for. Feel it. And say to yourself, repeat silently to yourself, I am whole. I am whole. I am powerful. I am powerful. I am free. I am free. Open your eyes. Merry Christmas.